This is Tyler, your antisocial critic and the host of the AntiSocial Network, your number one source for anachronistic conversations online. Come join us each week to hear opinions from some of the best voices discussing entertainment, politics, religion, and modern life on the internet today, most of which you've never heard of, but I have.
This week we're joined by the former Miss Esther O'Reilly. She is she's been on here several times now, but she remains a prolific writer, and now I think since the last time we talked, she's completed her doctorate, and she's revealed her actual name to the public, so she now goes by Bethel McGrew. How's it going?
It's going well, and actually I'm going to be a jerk and correct you. Everyone does this, but it's Bethel with emphasis on the EL.
Bethel.
But
okay.
Don't feel bad. Literally everybody pronounces it Bethel the first time. So
is there? I assume that was a biblical name. Is there a reason for the pronunciation like that?
Yeah, that is the original pronunciation. So it's a family name. I have a relative with that name, and I was the oldest, and my folks were Baptist Bible School graduates, and so they were in that kind of a mood when they got around to naming me, so that's how it happened.
Well, there you go. And so, when did you came out officially as with your real name? Like 2 months ago. What led up to that?
A lot of different things led up to that. It's something I've wanted to do for a really long time, but I'm a naturally anxious, nervous, indecisive kind of person, so I had just been putting it off and waffling on it because, I've touched a lot of third rails, and there was a time when I thought that I was going to go into academia, and so if I did that, then it felt like that would mean having to bury this side of myself maybe indefinitely. But something that a friend of mine said to me once kind of haunted me. He talked about somebody he knew who was in a similar boat, but promised himself that once he got tenure, everything would be different. So then he actually did, but it didn't actually change. And it was like his real self and this other self that he disguised behind a pen name. The way my friend put it is like those two selves had kind of fallen out of gravitational attraction to each other, and he was never able to integrate. So to use a little, Jungian speak, I guess, I always wanted to integrate. But then what happened was after I finished my doctorate, I realized that I was actually sort of tired with academia. I didn't really actually have ambitions to be a mathematician. I didn't have research ambitions. I just wanted to find a place to teach, and hopefully, preferably, a place that shared my values. And that's actually exactly what I found right out of grad school. Just a small, tucked away high school somewhere where the principal is friendly. He was aware of my work actually before I uncloaked, and told me he was fine with it and he would support me whatever I did. So that was kind of the last practical piece that slid into place that made me feel like I was confident enough to do that.
He'd actually read your work before you got your job. That's interesting. What did he say about it?
Just like a little bit. I mean, we began interviewing before he really. He didn't really know who I was. I just applied and went through a normal process. But just in the course of getting to know him and chatting, I just brought up, oh hey, this is a side of me that I do. I also write, and he looked at one or two of those things, and he was like, well, I don't have an issue with this. This is fine. Maybe a little salty for some other staff members at the school, but it didn't personally bother him. And so then that made me feel comfortable. It gave me a sense of security, like, oh, okay, maybe this is time.
What's the overwhelming reaction been or the general reaction been to your name change since you wrote the article about it? You have a sizable online following. What have they said about it?
It's really been overwhelmingly positive. Very supportive reaction, lots of lots of people saying nice things and encouraging me, and no real like repercussions that I can think of.
Well, that's probably for the best. I mean, obviously, the thing you don't want is for that to, the losers who do what's the guy's name who runs like the Media Matters crew, like you don't need those guys, bumming around.
Yes. Yeah. Well, and I mean, I don't know that I was expecting negative things to happen right away. I think it was more that I realized if I did this, there would be certain potential future avenues that were going to just close. So, I mean, there are certain kinds of jobs that I now know with this decision I'm not even going to bother trying to pursue. Or like, if I did, it would be very cautiously, very carefully, not putting my eggs in that basket. It was a bold move in that sense, but where I am at the moment, I feel secure.
Well, that's the important thing. You want to get rooted in the parts of your life that are actually important, and then kind of move career-wise as it kind of comes, and just deal with it as it is. I mean, you have a good enough background, I think, that you could as the baby boomers eventually start retiring in 50 years, because they're going to, but you're probably in a good position to pick up stuff in the long term, especially among the conservative establishments, since you have a pretty good house cleaning record compared to a lot of other more intense bloggers online. So you're probably in a good position to get something long term.
Well, I mean, it's certainly good for a side hustle. The thing about me, though, is that I've never actually been a super ambitious person, in the sense that I've never been the person like, oh my gosh, I want to get out of the Midwest, I want to live in New York, I want to go to cocktail parties and work for whoever. Like, that life seemed a little unhappy to me, actually, because I'm very much a country, suburb, whatever mouse in that sense. I'm really not a city mouse. I like where I'm at now, just location-wise, just geographically. I have my own car, which I drive to get my own groceries, and I know where everything is in town, and it's just, my schedule is fixed, and I like that. I like regularity in my life, and I think that I would be unhappy in the atmosphere of the city.
Yeah, I'm pretty much the same. I never had that grand, I have this one life goal that I have to drive, even when I was younger. Initially I considered the idea of going into education, but then I realized, my eventual realization made me think that it would be a bad career path based on the people I liked and disliked, and I didn't like other high schoolers when I was in high school, so I realized that I would need to find an incredibly specific niche to teach in which I would feel happy. And so that kind of just led to me down the long, weird career path that I've had, where somehow I go to film school and wind up becoming a journalist like 7 years later. I have no idea how that happened, but it happened, and now I have to live with it. But
well, I sort of feel like that as well, because I mean, certainly my dissertation advisor had thoughts that I would go on and be a mathematician like all her other students that she graduated. She kind of had hopes, I think, that I would go on and contribute to the field and do great things. And somewhere along the line, she sort of realized, oh, you're not really super into that, are you? It was this kind of unspoken thing as we worked together that kind of hung in the background. But, she was nice about it. She's like, well, whatever makes you happy, that's what I want for you. So, teaching high school algebra probably wasn't what she had in mind for me, but it is what makes me happy. The thing about teaching high school is it's kind of a trade-off as far as how much time I have in my schedule. So I'm teaching mathematics, which is less intensive in some ways than teaching humanities, because grading is faster, and it's easier to plan lessons and lectures and just kind of work out of a book and illustrate concepts and problems. But then there's just the life of a high school, just being part of the school, being part of the culture, being involved with extracurriculars, being involved with the kids, that kind of gradually soaks up time around the time when you're actually teaching. And I love that, actually. I don't really mind that, but it is good for me to not assume that I have more time than I actually do.
Yeah, and you're still able to do all of your writing and podcasting, everything on the side too. So you have the element, the added benefit of a good job that's fulfilling and your side hustle.
Exactly, yeah, and I do not take that for granted at all. It's something I kind of realized as I was thinking about this. I put this in a writing roundup I did at the Substack, is there's been times where I envied the full-time writer, where it's just like, oh man, you just get paid to write all the time, you don't have to do anything else. But, now as I think about it, I think, but if you're a full-time writer, you're a full-time writer for somebody. Right? There's some particular outlet that's hiring you. There's some particular editorial team that you have to satisfy, and you have to make content that fits into a certain niche and is geared to a certain audience. And you don't necessarily have the freedom to just write about whatever you want to. And I do have that freedom as a freelance. And so that's actually something I really value, and I don't know that I would actually want to trade it the more I think about it.
Yeah, especially in this writing economy, you really have to be the top of your field in order to get that total creative freedom, that where you are the guy everyone goes to, or the girl everyone goes to, who just he's the defining opinion maker on something, where it's a hard hustle, and you pay for it in other ways where you don't get a regular consistent.
Yeah, or you have to write some best-selling books and get to the point where you're just self-sustaining. Like Rod Dreher, I think, is a good example. He certainly wasn't born with a silver spoon in his mouth. He had to work very, very hard. And so just over the accumulation of years and experience and some hit books, he's at that place now where he can do whatever he likes. And, he can start a Substack and it pulls in tens of thousands of dollars all by itself. So I definitely don't begrudge Rod that at all, but he is unusual in this economy.
Yeah, and when I think of the big names, I generally think of like the really big names, your Hitchenses or your big NRO names or your big Atlantic names. Like those are the guys that are making like the bank. Those are it's hard enough to make like a middle class living as a writer nowadays, like because the middle market just doesn't seem to exist really. It's you're either like a drone at one of these websites, like a middle tier website that's just spitting out content like 500 words a day or something like that, or you're the best of the best and you're doing whatever you want. And there's not a lot of middle ground, it seems, unless you just do want to do independent writing for fun or because or as a side hustle in your case.
Yeah, that's a good point. And it's interesting to see how writers like Barry Weiss or Andrew Sullivan, because they were legacy writers, I would say especially Sullivan, even though they fell out with their legacy publications over woke stuff, they had such name recognition and such an individual following that they were able to pack up and move to Substack and just bring their income with them, really. But again, you have to be Andrew Sullivan already or Barry Weiss already to really make that work.
Or you have to have like a massive media scandal that gets you like placed in the limelight constantly, which that works if you're Barry Weiss. I remember I had this talk with Faith Moore a couple years back when I was trying to get that book done, and she said like in this writing market, you can't get a book published unless you have either a massive social media following, or some level of like splashiness to him. Like James Damore probably could get a book published if he wanted to write a book, because he's James Damore, the guy that got fired from Google for saying the unsayable facts. Like you can't be that guy. You have to be that guy in order to get the kind of attention. Like there's the middle market for just being a very talented writer, just Chesterton-style writing, just like being a middle-class writer, just doesn't exist right now.
Yeah, either that or... So I've had interesting conversations about this with our mutual friend Hannah Long, because she works acquisitions for HarperCollins. So she's very good at sussing out when somebody has an idea that might sell, a hook that might actually sell. She's also very good at sussing out when something isn't quite going to land. So, like, I was discussing with her a book I'd really liked, and I was disappointed that it was flopping. And then she began kind of enumerating the different reasons why it might be flopping. And as she talked, I realized, oh, you know what? She's kind of right. She's just got her finger on that pulse. But I was going to say, to add to that list, you could also get something published if you have really specialized knowledge about something that other people haven't written about before, or at least haven't written about in the way that you could write about it with your specialized knowledge. So Hannah will do that. You know, she'll come up with an idea like, hey, we really haven't seen a really good book on X, and so-and-so would really be the person to do that, because so-and-so knows all about X. So here, let me approach so-and-so and suggest that he do this, and then we'll acquire it and see how it goes. It's more difficult, though, if you're not a specialist. If you're like me, I don't have particularly specialized knowledge in a whole lot of areas. I'm a generalist in this sort of classic old-fashioned sense. And so, you know, what that means is, you know, I could put myself out there like, hey, I'll be on your podcast. It's like, well, hey, great. What do we talk about? And I think to myself, oh, yeah, that's kind of a good question. What would we talk about? Because it's not like I'm the go-to girl for fill in the blank, you know?
Well, it's a double-edged sword to be a specialist, because a lot of people that do that kind of specialty writing, you know, the academics and such, they're so good at doing their specialty that their book just, you know, it hits that niche, and you're lucky if that niche is useful enough that, you know, some college out there decides they want to use that as one of their textbooks. But in a lot of cases, you're lucky to get a couple hundred or a couple thousand sales on a lot of these niche texts. I mean, if you're someone like, you know, some pop professor like your Bart Ehrman or Louis Marcos, who are, you know, above average fame in terms of how well they're known and how well they're respected, you could probably sell, you know, several tens of thousands of books of your kind. But a lot of professors, their book's going to get published, and it's going to go like just go right into the bin of every other book on Amazon.
Yeah, and then academic specialization is a whole interesting area as well. And we've been talking about journalism and culture writing. But I could talk a lot about the problem of academic specialization, because I'm an academy brat myself. That was my whole world kind of growing up. So I've watched, looking at different academic debates and how they've played out, I've watched the dangers of siloing, and people they're so entrenched in whatever methodology they've been trained in their particular narrow slice of things, that it's like they're almost incapable of thinking outside the box and allowing an outsider perspective to shift their paradigms.
Or it just becomes so deeply entrenched that it's almost unreadable if you don't have any level of academic specializations. I mean, I've been getting a lot of review copies in the mail, and I forget who, I think it was Scott Swain's book on Trinitarianism, and I just felt like such a frigging moron reading that book.
Oh dear, yeah, systematic theology, that's its own world too, yeah.
Yeah, like there's a level of this where it's like, okay, I need, you know, I need an associate's degree to understand this, because this is there's too many layers of exegetical analysis going on here for me to just casually explain what's happening in a way that feels satisfactory. But so but obviously there's a place for that, though. It's just not for me necessarily, but it does. I can't imagine a book like that necessarily, you know, making you a millionaire. It reminds me of the Dennis Prager joke where he's like, you know, my one goal in life is to be the author that managed to sell a best-selling book about Leviticus commentary. But, well, we'll see if that actually happens or not when his commentary comes out. But anyway, we kind of buried the lead a little bit in terms of what we wanted, what we did plan the discussion being. That was how we're both kind of adjusting to our adult lives. Because in the past probably 4 or 5 months, we both kind of had this not necessarily the same experience, but similar experiences that we both kind of flew out of the nest for the first time. I moved to Nashville for my journalism job, and you left your families for the first time for your first career. And I kind of thought it might be interesting to kind of discuss how that reaction is. I mean, what was your thoughts like as you were kind of going through getting past graduation and just kind of stepping outside of the academy for the first time in years?
It was difficult for me because I'm very close to my folks, and I had a delayed launch because my school was right in my hometown. So as just a pure money-saving thing, I lived at home with my folks through my grad school education, which was great economically, but less great practically, because it wasn't giving me the chance to develop the skills and the resilience that most kids had developed long before they got to my age. So, it was a bit of a delayed growth spurt in that sense. And but once it actually happened, for myself personally, I found the jump a lot easier than I had feared. And it's just given me so much more confidence just as a person, because, in Jordan Peterson terms, my room was not entirely clean. I had a lot of anxiety issues, a lot of confidence issues, just a lot of worries about what was coming next and how I was going to be able to manage it. But one nice thing is that the place where I work now is not so far away from my hometown that it's like a epic marathon trip to get back for holidays and weekends and stuff. So, although I don't really have time to do on non-holiday weekends as things have shaken out, but that's been really helpful for me. And then also, being where I'm at this school, because the people around me share my values, it feels like I've gained a community, really, which I didn't so much have in my hometown. I was kind of a hermit loner, really. I had my folks, and that was basically it. But here at this school, it's like its own little family, and they've just welcomed me with open arms. And I share a quad housing on the school grounds with a couple other families, and it's just like, whatever you need, you call so and so. He comes over, he checks your faucet or whatever. I'm bonding with the kids, I'm bonding with the staff, and that's something I've been looking for all my life, really, I think. So I'm extremely blessed and fortunate to have found that, because that's not something that everybody is able to find on moving out. But it certainly has made it much easier for me.
I'd say my experience is loosely equivalent to that, in the sense that when everything finally settled down and I was finally able to take root in a new place, like, you feel better than where you were initially. Like remember the first time I went back home after a month of being on my own. It was a legitimately bizarre experience. Like, it was like there was almost like a level of surrealness to it. Like, you just like you're stepping back into like some sort of weird Lynchian nightmare. Not that the people are bad or anything, or the place is bad, but that the place is so different than when you remember it being, and there's a level of distance to it. But I will say, though, in my experience, because I'd been living with my parents for so long, like the initial weeks were very rough. Like, and I moved a lot farther than you did. I mean, Chicago to Nashville
that's far, yeah.
It's not the craziest thing I could have done. Like, I had spurious job offers in like San Diego that I turned down and stuff like that. Like, just because it was for various reasons. But like, Nashville is a big jump. It's about 500 miles, and it took multiple attempts to move everything down, because even when you rent a U-Haul, you realize just how much crap you own.
Yep.
It took a long time to get everything down, and then because I'm, a complete psychopath, I managed to completely unpack and decorate within a week. Something, and which is probably not a good sign in the grand scheme of things. But once everything kind of settled down, and once the anxiety of moving and the relative depression of not having of your roots being up completely ripped up, and all your friends are gone, and your life is now completely different. Like, once you kind of get in the position, it is almost comforting. Like, it feels for the first time I'm actually like standing up on my own, which is a weird feeling.
Yes, yeah, it's an excellent way of putting it. And for me, moving into a position of authority as a teacher, it's a little daunting because I'm standing up in front of a room of high school kids who are all looking at me as the adult authority figure in the room. It's like, wow, okay, yeah, I'm the person in charge. Fantastic. And it really is fantastic, but it also makes me kind of nervous. But then when the kids respond to me and like they want to learn from me, and they call me doctor and miss and all that kind of stuff, it's really sweet. It makes me feel like, okay, I found myself as a leader in a way. I was going to go back to what you said earlier about the first time that you went back home after having gotten used to Nashville. And the way that I felt, I didn't find anything really changed. When I come home, things are kind of the same. But it felt like jumping through a portal. It's like there is a portal, and I'm able to open it from time to time, but it's like you go between dimensions in some weird sense.
It does. I mean, my room is particularly weird visually, just because there's so many weird marks of the room that my dad's place that are still there. Like, one of the weird things about my old room was that I accidentally caused some minor smoke damage to it, because I used to light a lot of candles, and when I took everything off the walls in that room, like there was black shadows behind all of it, because that's where all the smoke crept. So every time I go back, it's just an empty room covered in like weird smoke shadows. So it's like this almost creepy look to it. Like, this is like where I used to live, but everything's gone, and all my possessions are up north or down south. And like, it's a weird visual reminder of how much has changed. And
yeah,
and even just the process of going back is so daunting, because the distance is there. I mean, 500 miles ideally that's a 2-day trip, but every time I do it, it's a 1-day trip, because it's too expensive and too time consuming to stop at a hotel on the way. And when you work full time, it's not always an option. You just have to drive through the night and get home and get ready to go to work the next day. There's not the kind of buffer you get if you just live an hour or two away. It's a completely different world. And it's very weird, just kind of like, the first time I went back, it felt like reverting. But every time I'm going back, like the second and third time I've gone back, it feels less so, just because I guess I'm more rooted here now. But it's still very strange.
Yeah, I'm additionally blessed that I know a priest and his wife who attend my old Anglican parish back in my hometown, and also live in the hometown where I moved to. So on Sundays, they're willing to take me with them, and I can just kind of hitch a ride in their back seat and see my folks briefly at church. But I can't really hang around or see my house, because they're immediately turning around and going back up. But that's also been really, really a blessing for me. So I get perks that you don't get having moved as far away as Nashville. So, this is a function of me only being 2 hours away. But the fact that I'm not the world's most confident driver, that we have bad weather, and that generally there really isn't time for me to make a weekend visit, all kind of combine for me to really not see my folks now, except for those brief Sundays when my friends are willing to commute with me, and then actually being at home during the regularly scheduled breaks.
That's still a blessing, though. I mean, my old pastor back up outside of Chicago, he he grew up in, I think, outside of Dallas in Texas, and then obviously he moved up north to run his own church. And I remember when I sat down with him for breakfast one Sunday, and he said, I only get to see my parents once a year at Christmas or around the holidays. And he said very sadly, like, when you have parents in your 80s, you know for a fact that you're within the last 10, that you're only going to see your parents 10 more times while they're still alive. Less than that. And so the longer the distance becomes, the more that time becomes important. And in your case, it's a blessing that you're just able to see them at least once a week. I mean, a lot of people don't have that.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, that may taper off as the weather gets worse, because up here in Michigan winters are not great for driving. So we like to do less of it as things move on. We're actually having a delayed winter just at the moment. It did snow today, but the snow has been kind of delayed and off and on. So I look forward to a white Easter next year. That's going to be awesome.
Yeah, my dad sent me photos of snow in Illinois too. And really, Illinois weather doesn't get incredibly sleety until about February. So yeah, white Easter it is. It's not going to be fun, but the important thing is that we don't have to deal with another polar vortex this year, if at all possible.
We have so the school where I teach, we're pretty self-sufficient. We have our own well water, and we also have our own generator. So if power went out in the town, I think we would still be okay. So that's kind of neat. It's like our own little country castle.
I'm curious if I have another experience that I'm curious if you can relate to at all. Is the experience of wishing that the place you've moved to is more different than your hometown? Because I moved from the suburb of one big city went to the suburb of another big city. My biggest takeaway from the move was just how similar the cities were, and I mean, really? Culturally, politically, the people that tend to go live in the areas. It actually kind of bothered me how similar Nashville was, because I was sold moving to the South as the experience of moving to the South, and somehow I managed to land on the island of tyranny and the ocean of freedom, and it bothers me. It goes back to something I noticed when I did a lot of traveling during COVID, that America, as we know it, has become extremely gentrified, and almost everywhere you go, especially if you highway drive, is exactly the same as every other place. So if you jump from one island to the other, you're not really engaging with a new culture. You're just engaging with the same culture with a facelift in a handful of ways. Because you still get the same corrupt politicians, you still get the same grumpy hipsters and the same microbrew restaurants and it's just a different the flavor isn't exactly as distinct as you'd think it would be, even though there's certainly regional things here in Nashville I couldn't do in Chicago. There's no Parthenon remake in Chicago. There's no
Grand Ole Opry.
Yeah, exactly. There's not
fewer murders, hopefully.
I don't know. Anywhere you have a big city, you're going to have high crime and political corruption. So, is that different because you're more of a country person?
Well, I will say for me, I have felt the difference in that I grew up very much in a suburb, and I've moved, I would say, more out in the country. I'm now living to where it's meaningful to talk about going into town. So it takes maybe 10 minutes to get off the country road and into a place where there's businesses and stuff. So I felt kind of a subtle shift there, that I feel like I've moved from a more suburban area to a more rural area.
Yeah, I mean, think about I'm in a similar spot in terms of where I live, because I don't live in Nashville proper. But the weird thing, one of the weird things about Nashville is that unlike some other big cities, the moment you're outside of the city limits, you're pretty much in an area that's half rural and half suburban. It never up until the last 10 years, it never got fully developed. But in the last, as Nashville has become this this mecca for people that are trying to escape all of the other failing cities. Like every single town is being revitalized and or developed. So the area where I live, at one point, it was a dying country city or village, and maybe 5,000 people, 10,000 people, 2 or 3 restaurants everyone goes to, a couple every single church says first on it because you only need one, and but now it's like they're everything is building up because all of the excess of Nashville is starting to fill out into the suburbs, and people are like there's at least like 4 apartment complexes that are being built within 5 minutes of where I am because the demand is just that high. Everyone wants to be here, and so
you could see, of course, Daily Wire moved their whole headquarters there, and I'm sure that COVID has had a lot to do with that in most recent years.
Yeah, I mean, what's that the Twitter knockoff that was conservative-ish and got blasted off the App Store last year? Their headquarters is going to be in Nashville soon. Like a ton of companies are moving to Nashville. Like it's becoming like a corporate haven.
Yeah, I would imagine you basically get all of your West Coast discontents and all of your East Coast discontents at the same time.
Yeah, it's making a really weird culture because at any given point, one person I meet is someone that's lived in Tennessee their entire life, and the other person is someone that moved to Tennessee because their city is dead and they needed to go somewhere. It's like this weird, almost a melting pot, but the two sides don't really get along all that well. It's just like this very aggressive Cold War, but it's the opposite of what I experienced in Illinois, where it's a red state being held hostage by Chicago. This is the red state that's holding Nashville hostage, and it kind of feels amusing. And the people in Nashville know it. They know they can't do anything against it, so they just spend all their time grumbling about how they can't get the state to do what they want. Which that there's a lot of Schadenfreude involved in that, which it'll probably take an entire podcast to unpack some of that. But I mean, what else has your what other emotions has your move brought out? Like, has it affected your faith journey or many of your personal relationships that you had to make the move you did?
Yeah, I think it's been very good for my faith journey, I would say, because we have one of the great things about our school is that we have a very age-integrated culture here. So we have an upper school, but we also have a relatively recently added grammar school. So, the big kids will come in for lunch, and then they go back to classes, and the little kids come in for lunch in the same cafeteria. And we have chapel every Friday. Everyone is all sitting in the same chapel, and one of our leading staff guys gets up, and he's got some pastoral experience, so he has to preach a simple message that's going to cut across all of the age groups and appeal to everybody in the room, and he does a great job of that. So it's a great antidote to the kind of segregation by age culture that you get in way too many churches, I think. So the people around me are they're devout. They know their Bible. There's a culture of prayer and knowing scripture. And so that really keeps me, it keeps me humble, and it's like a constant refresher. And it's something that I never had. Again, it's certainly something I didn't have when I was going to school, because I just went to a public university where, I liked the other grad students and whatnot who I worked with, but I didn't really share anything important in common with them, except that we all were trying to get this math homework done. And so that's all really changed now.
Can you say what denomination your school is without revealing where it is necessarily? Because I don't know how many private religious schools there are in Michigan. So
so it began as a Church of God Seventh Day church. So mostly, although which I've been told is different from Seventh-day Adventist. I'm not really up on all the ins and outs of that difference, but I have sometimes been corrected for using them interchangeably. But I think that was primarily what it used to be, because it's been around for like decades. But then that demographic shifted, and a lot of people moved away from the area, and so the school shrunk in size a lot and was in danger of just closing up. So now they're opening up, and they're a little more ecumenical. They're certainly ecumenical in how they hire. I mean, one of the other teachers who works there is a young Eastern Orthodox guy, actually. So he and I connected. We kind of get along. But there's still kind of vestiges of Church of God Seventh-day culture there. So, like, the cafeteria is kosher, for example. The church services are held on Saturday instead of Sunday. Saturday is regarded as the Sabbath for the school. So that's all kind of there. But, they're not just serving Church of God Seventh-day kids. They're serving an eclectic denominational cross-section.
That's interesting. I was curious if it was tied in specifically to your Anglican faith, so it'd be fascinating if it actually was. But that sounds interesting that it's that wide open. I remember when I was very young, up and from like kindergarten to second grade, I went to a Lutheran private school, but that probably. So I'm kind of imagining they're not that different in their orientation and how they're set up and how they're run. Other than the fact that school is probably a lot smaller than yours.
Well, we're pretty small. We're kind of trying to grow back. Like I said, it used to be bigger, and then it shrunk way down. And now we're like seeing if we can slowly grow it again. The other interesting thing is that we're sort of half a boarding school. So we have 2 dorms where a number of students board, but not all of the students board. So it's kind of a mix. And for the kids who board, not all of them, but a number of them are, sort of glad for the opportunity because they come out of broken homes or dysfunctional homes. So it's interesting. Like if I said, I teach at a private school, that could give people a certain low resolution cultural picture in their minds of what it would be like, but it's not preppy at all. A lot of our kids come from blue collar backgrounds, and so my principal warned me when I took the job on. He's like, "No, look, we do not have a math culture here. You are a missionary. Okay, you need to see yourself as bringing the gospel of math to a heathen race." And so I'm like, okay, then let's try it.
Well, children are barbarians, so you're doing the Lord's work.
I really do feel like I am. It is true, not just a joke.
Well, there you go. We're getting close to the hour mark. Do you have any other thoughts about the transition between your old life and your new life, and like what that's been like for you that you want to share? Or
yeah, I think I just I'm just so thankful that I feel like I found a purpose, because I really just wasn't sure where I was supposed to be when I was in that in-between place after finishing my degree, because my head had been so full of school, that's like, okay, well, that's over now. What do I do? Because I always knew that I was gifted as a teacher, and I always just wondered where I was supposed to use that, how I was supposed to use that. So now I've been given a clear place where I can use that, and I can actually invest in kids and get to know them, which as a teaching assistant, you have like maybe 100 students that you don't really get to know, and that wasn't what I wanted. I wanted a place where I could develop a sense of relationship with students, and invest in them as people and not just math students. And that's something that I'm beginning to get to do now, and I'm able to touch kids who've maybe had some kind of rough life experiences, and help them understand math for the first time. And that's just hugely rewarding. And that's something that I wish for everybody. I wish that everybody can find that place where, how did Frederick Buechner put it? Where your deepest calling meets the world's deepest need, or something like that.
And I'll add on top of that it's a very hard transition. In my case, it took weeks and a lot of money and a lot of leap of faith willingness to do something that you don't know is necessarily going to pay off in the end.
Yeah.
It really, if you really commit to it and if you really put the effort in and face one problem at a time and slowly root yourself again, it does pay off. And especially for our relative generation, who tend to be who often do get stuck in that failure to launch state, the leap is worth it, and eventually things do settle down, and you realize you're flying a lot sooner than you think you will.
I was going to ask you, do you maintain, do you email or call or Zoom on any kind of regular basis with your folks at home, or is that just kind of difficult for you to do? Because I know that I told myself I would do that when I moved, but I just wound up kind of functionally letting it slide because, I would be wrapped up in work, and I never set up like hey, every Saturday night we'll Zoom for an hour or something like that.
Well, I guess the simple answer is that I have a slightly different relationship with my parents than you do.
Okay.
Childhood divorce, it tends to make relationships a little more transactional at times.
Yeah, for sure.
I love my parents. I will always do my best to honor them, but I talk to them maybe about once a week, usually on the phone. It's never quite the level where I would sit and talk with them for an hour on Zoom or anything like that. Unless I thought something was actually like very wrong and I needed to, see them face to face, which hasn't happened yet. So in that sense, that made the transition, I would guess, easier for you because you didn't have as tight of a bond that you had to break in order to launch. Familiar-wise, yes. In terms of my friends, that proved to be a different challenge because you don't realize until you move how many people you know in your area, and then how many lifelong friendships are gets sidetracked by distance. Now, thankfully, I also have a lot of online friends who were able to help kind of make the transition easier, and a lot of people for whom my relationship to them was mostly text based, so I was able to kind of just continue having the same kind of discussions and conversations we were having before, just with the added distance. So yeah, you're right though that in my case the way my relationships were oriented definitely kind of made the transition easier than it would have been had I been more heavily invested in my immediate circle other than friends and stuff. So
online friendships are interesting. I mean, this could be like a whole separate podcast on community and friendships and virtual community and that kind of thing. But I mean, I definitely am in more regular touch with certain people that I know only online than I am with people who I've known locally. Just because they're not on the same platforms where I am. And I don't know if that's a good thing necessarily, because how regularly you stay in touch with somebody shouldn't be dependent on how much they use Twitter, but because that's sort of by inertia, that's where I've graduated as far as where I live, so to speak, where I kind of hang out, where my head is at. I'm just regularly bouncing stuff off of certain people, which is great, but I always have to remind myself that's not the same thing as putting your roots down somewhere and building a tangible community.
Yeah, it's a double-edged sword like anything. I mean, you realize very quickly, in my case, I realized very quickly that online friends are not the same thing as, interpersonal friends. You need the connections of being around people and being in the presence of others on a weekly basis to function properly. Otherwise, you get really stir crazy. And I figured that out very quickly and started, doing everything I could to figure out ways to meet people around me, even though it took a while to actually get that done. I mean, once you hit past a certain age, mid to late 20s, everyone's got a job and everyone's got the priorities in their life, so it's very hard to actually get people out and trying to meet them in person or just trying to even strike up friendships. But once you finally do, then those friendships are much they're invaluable. You can't go without them.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's something that I don't know that churches have really figured out the optimal way to deal with it, because there is no optimal way necessarily, and one could go on about singles ghetto and all that sort of thing. That's its own topic.
Yeah, and in my case, being down south, I thought I knew churches were going to be a good way to meet people, but the thing I did not expect was just how not traditional the culture down here is in terms of their Bible orientation.
Really? In what way?
If you go to any Baptist church, they're oriented in the way that every Baptist church is. Bible first. We are a Bible believing church, but if you look at it in terms of general cultural trends, they're very contemporary in their general orientation. I know online it's very popular to act like we're seeing the complete resurgence of the trad movement and liturgy is completely taking over. But when I go to churches down here, I'm not seeing that at all. One of the first churches I went to was an Episcopalian church, and there was one young person or two young people in the entire church. Everyone else was over the age of 70.
That I can well believe, the Episcopalian church.
But then I go to a Baptist church, and they have 3 separate services based on how traditional music is.
Yes.
The traditional music is completely dead. There's maybe 20 people in the entire thing. The contemporary stuff is so crowded that there's almost not enough room in the bleachers. It's night and day in terms of what people actually want. So I ended up going to services that were much more contemporary than I wanted, just because I wanted the social aspect. I'm okay, I'll hold my tongue on listening to music that's actually palatable, just because I want to meet people. So
I can well believe that's a difficult trade-off. But you make an astute point there about perceived cultural shift versus actual cultural shift based on how online you are. So maybe among the extremely online, we're seeing a resurgence of whatever, but it's its own cultural bubble, really.
Yeah, if you're a terminally online former atheist, then you're probably going to be moving towards, Orthodoxy or Catholicism, because it's the actual inverse of everything you believe, whereas Protestantism is kind of, between them in some regards in terms of their intellectual orientation. So it's kind of
although you might find, if you actually seriously showed up at a serious Orthodox church and said, okay, what does it mean to be Orthodox? Be like, you can't just waltz in here and say, hi, I want to be Orthodox. There's a bunch of stuff you got to do, a bunch of hoops to jump through.
Yeah, I think a lot of the converts like that, because they want the serious, hefty symbolism and intellectual heft and the liturgy and the stuff that's the mere opposite of the pure reason they were weaned on. They want something that has some challenge to it, whereas Protestantism tends to be I'm not going to say anti-intellectual, but there's a lot of very it's a very lay culture. And a lot of atheists are pretty repelled by that. They don't like that. A lot of what they their Bible readings are they aren't rooted in kind of the theology or the intellectual side of Christianity. So it can be I get why so many atheists tend to jump ship and pick the inverse opposite of what they grew up with, because there's an element of novelty and depth to it. And even in my case, I've been very not necessarily Orthodox curious, but Anglicanism curious in the past half year, and that's been something I've tried experimenting with. But it's a shift. But you have to be in a certain place to want that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, we've officially chewed through the hour. Do you have any thoughts to close on for people that are kind of in our spots? Or
I think I would say, and this kind of ties into the uncloaking, but it's probably better in the long run to just be you. If you're thinking ahead and you're worried about a career and you're worried about what doors might close, you'll feel better, I think, if you're able to integrate the different parts of yourself, and then just kind of see where that leads. At the same time, I know that not everybody is able to do that. And then I think, as far as thoughts on launching, that's going to be different for everybody. Like, even the two of us have differences, as has come out here, differences in how easy or difficult that is. But somebody said something interesting to me once. He said, well, you're like going to teach high school math. And he was a really nice guy, but the way that he said it had a touch of like assuming that I was settling, and I would say, don't let anybody make you feel like you're settling. Just do what you want to do, and if it's not a big deal by certain standards, don't worry about that. Just do what you like, what seems to fit your goals, and I believe God will reward that. I really do.
You're better off to be, rooted in good habits and a not particularly shiny and, exciting place in life, as long as you're, putting in the effort and actually doing the work that needs to be done and working on yourself and, actually growing, which is the important thing.
Yes, absolutely.
All right. Well, that's a podcast. Thank you so much for coming on again.
Thank you so much for having me. Oh, and also, thank you so much, and I gave you a shout out on Twitter for this, but thank you for the cookies that you sent, which saved me at the nick of time, because one of the things I've been doing a lot as I've moved out is I've been cooking a lot on my own. So I had an unsuccessful shortbread cookie experiment the night before I was going to do a party for my kids, and I was like, well, I do have this box of Christmas cookies from Tyler, so I guess I could just feed them those. And so I did. They were a hit. So thank you so much, Tyler, for bringing my two worlds together in such a tasty way there.
Well, I the only instruction I gave you with those cookies was that you had to share them, because I gave you a lot of them. So I'm glad that they went to good use. Although
they were all gone.
I was somewhat worried after the fact that there was peanut butter in them and that I may or may not have killed some of your students. So I'm glad to hear that there were no,
No, we do have a couple of peanut butter allergies, but none among my students. So okay, you're good. Nobody died.
Yeah, I remember back, even when I was a kid in elementary school, like, the peanut thing was huge. So I'm like, good, she didn't kill our students. Good, I'm good.
No, we're good. We get like a list. We got a list at the beginning of the semester of everybody who had allergies to what. And so we're like aware, but I was really glad that there was nobody among my students, because, yeah, I would have to be careful of what I cooked as well.
Oh, man. My old elementary school just flat out banned peanuts and gluten products, so from any sort of snacking. So you're lucky.
Yeah.
All right.
All right. Take care. Thanks so much.
You too. Bye.
Bye.
The AntiSocial Network is a Groupthink Productions podcast. Editing, producing, and hosting are by Tyler Hummel, artwork by Crystal Cowley, and original music was composed by Melissa Lafira and the late Dan Smolla. Like, subscribe, and please let us know what you think about the show in the comments below if you'd like to see anyone interesting be a guest on the show. Thank you for listening.